This is the modern National Guard. What was once a strategic reserve force, supporting the regular army in times of need and meeting national disaster response requirements at home, is now an operational fighting force, matching the regular Army and Air Force person for person in today's modern wars. But how did we get from the traditional colonial Minutemen, so indelibly painted in our childhood history lessons, to where we are today?
I'm ready to go. We are trained well. The Berserkers do lead the way. We're here to stay, at least for a while anyway. We're going to come in, we're going to get our job done, and we're all coming home.
On any given holiday in the United States, citizens across the country watch colorful, festive parades celebrating the American way of life. Practically all these parades include our military. Since the 17th century, folks in service to their village, their colony, and now their state have upheld the truths defined by the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Although soldiers and airmen wear the same uniforms today, the participants may be career soldiers or may be members of the local National Guard who trace their roots directly to the colonial soldiers of old. In fact, it's more likely that they are members of the local Army and Air National Guard, those brave citizens who serve their community both as citizens and as soldiers. It's a complicated system that evolved across 400 years of American history. This video has been carefully crafted to explain the relationship between the federal government, the state governments, and their citizen soldiers. From domestic emergency responses like Hurricane Katrina, the catastrophe on 9/11, or global pandemics, to fighting shoulder to shoulder with the active duty Army and Air Force in Afghanistan and Iraq. There is no richer military heritage in the United States than the National Guard. Always ready, always there. The story begins in Europe, when we brought over the concept of small groups of armed, trained, local volunteers who defended their communities. By the 17th century, colonists arrived in the New World and began to organize. Their very survival depended on service in the rudimentary militias. By the 18th century, America fought a bloody war to escape the tyranny of the British monarchy. America's founding fathers granted the federal government authority to defend the young nation's communal interests by including to provide for the common defense in the Constitution, the document in which all subsequent laws would be rooted. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. Balancing both the interest of a federal government and of the individual states, the early Congress reached a compromise. For the Federalist, Congress was to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia. Congress was to govern only the parts of the militia when the soldiers were in service of the United States. For the Anti-Federalist, the appointment of officers and training and discipline in the manner in which Congress laid out would remain with the states. The compromise was articulated in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Today we refer to this as the Militia Clause. Rapidly, the new nation expanded across the American continent and flourished. Following the catastrophic upheaval of the Civil War, a divided nation attempted to heal itself. By 1878, a group of National Guard general officers met to form the National Guard Association of the United States, dedicated to protecting the rights afforded the militias by the Militia Clause of the Constitution. As the nation began to grow and develop interest overseas, the need for military manpower increased. True to its heritage, the federal government maintained a small standing army, dwarfed by the number of soldiers in the many state militias. Congress, aware that the numbers of soldiers in the militias of the many states could more than double the number of the standing army, looked to enlist guardsmen in overseas conflicts. As with any time of rapid growth and development, the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries brought about civil disorder and labor unrest. The governors of the states were willing to use their militias to quell uprisings and strikes. However, in 1878, the Congress and the President passed a law referred to as Posse Comitatus, which stated that no National Guardsman on any sort of federal status could enforce local laws. In other words, the United States would not have a federal domestic military with police powers enforceable against the citizens. The time had come to make the roles of the militias and the federal standing army clear, and in 1903, Representative Charles Dick, President of the National Guard Association of the United States and former Adjutant General of the National Guard of Ohio, saw to it that the states would benefit from the financial support of the federal government if taken as troops in the service of the country as a whole. Events of the early 20th century would rapidly force the United States into blending the militias and the regular army. With the passage of the Dick Act, federal money was allocated to the states to make integration into active duty easier and to standardize training. The National Guard became, by law, the primary reserve force of the federal army. In 1912, Attorney General George W. Wickersham rendered a decision stating that the National Guard could not be used in overseas service in conditions other than declared war. Thus, the National Guard became effectively useless as a reserve force for the standing army in federal service. But in 1914, World War I broke out like wildfire across Europe. Trench warfare and indiscriminate use of mustard gas rendered Europe into a hellscape from which there seemed no salvation. Anticipating inevitable American involvement, Congress amended the Dick Act in the National Defense Act of 1916, permitting the federalization of the National Guard for overseas duty and repairing the language that had so bothered Attorney General Wickersham. The statute expressly provided that the Army of the United States would include not only the regular Army, but also the National Guard, while in service of the United States. This act required all guardsmen to take a dual oath to obey the President and the Governor. It authorized the President or Congress to mobilize the National Guard for active duty service. The language expressly provided that, when mobilized for federal service, members of the National Guard of the United States should, from the date of mobilization, stand discharged from the militia and be subject to the rules and regulations governing the regular Army. As a result, thousands of National Guardsmen were mobilized into the National Guard of the United States and sent into combat on the fields of France and Belgium. While remaining true to the militia clause of the Constitution, Congress both doubled the size of the Army as well as clarified the role of a federalized National Guard. World War I ended a year after America's arrival, and National Guardsmen began to return home. The National Defense Act of 1920 established a strong standing army, bolstered by a permanent reserve component. And in 1933, Congress put on the final touch to ensure that, while federalized guardsmen could serve overseas with a smooth transition from state service to federal service, the reverse would be the same upon their return. The Act of 1920 and the Amendment of 1933 created an overlapping system of membership. National Guardsmen automatically joined both the State National Guard and the National Guard of the United States upon taking their oaths. Natural roles as citizens or their ordinary state service became the default status of National Guardsmen. When called to duty in service of the federal government, however, Guardsmen would transition seamlessly from state duty to the National Guard of the United States and be governed in the same manner as any other federal member of the military. Forevermore, the National Guard of the several states would be clearly distinguished from the National Guard of the United States. Additionally, the National Defense Act of 1933 renamed the Militia Bureau and created a centralized communications department. Thus, today's National Guard Bureau was born. Although its significance would grow exponentially, and with the help of the National Guard Association, it is important to note that the National Guard Bureau was not designed with a command function. It was destined to become a communication conduit between the Department of Defense and the National Guards of the many states, territories, and the District of Columbia. While today's Bureau distributes federal funds to the 54 so they may use them to train to federal standards, the training itself is managed by the many states as stipulated in the Militia Clause. Within just a few years, war would again erupt in Europe, one that the United States would avoid joining until the fateful attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The day that would live in infamy launched 18 National Guard infantry divisions into action around the world, on the shores of the islands of the Pacific and on the beaches of North Africa and Europe. National Guardsmen fought in federal status on behalf of the Allies and the United States of America. Meanwhile, the National Guard was flexing its muscles on a different front, becoming the primary resource for the states in times of domestic catastrophes brought about by natural disasters and civil disruption. As early as the 19th century, Guardsmen were called upon to quash labor strikes and enforce federal laws within our borders. As the communist threat spread across the globe, America found itself back at war. By the 1950s and 60s, the Guard was peripheral to the containment policy in Korea and Vietnam. However, the national policy used Guard enrollment as a deferment from participation. At home, the combination of race riots and anti-war demonstrations in the United States reached a fever pitch. Public opinion of the National Guard plummeted. The military establishment, led by General Creighton Abrams, correctly identified part of the problem as having left the heart of America behind. By leaving the National Guard home and forcing unwilling young men to war through a draft, America turned against the war effort as something alien, far away from their communities and familiar lives. And so the Abrams Doctrine was born. We would never go to war again without the Guard and reserves. Harkening back to Representative Dick's vision in 1903, the National Guard of the United States was set firmly in place as the primary reserve force of the United States Army and Air Force. The Guard was now on the tip of the spear, a fully fledged operational force serving two missions, one at home and one across international borders. What began as the Abrams Doctrine became formalized as the Total Force Policy in 1973, 70 long years after Representative Dick's first idea to establish the Guard as the primary reserve force of the regular Army. One of the first successful tests of the Total Force Policy was Operation Desert Shield and Storm. In 1990, National Guard forces mobilized, and nearly 90,000 Army and Air Guardsmen played a crucial role in the liberation of Kuwait against the aggression of its neighbor, Iraq.
The great thing about Anaconda is it's a total force element over here from the Army. It's the active component, the Army National Guard, and the reserves working together in a very integrated way.
But the most crucial test of the Total Force Policy, launching the United States into two of the longest wars it has ever fought, would not occur until 10 years later, on September 11, 2001. On that fateful day, the National Guard would be called upon to serve the nation in every capacity.
Sounds like we're talking to New York, but there's another one aimed at the World Trade Center.
There's another aircraft?
The second one just hit the Trade Center.
Okay. Yeah, we gotta alert the military real quick on this.
Guardsmen mustered to answer the call of domestic terror, and within a month were federalized, sent to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. Within a month of the attacks on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and Pennsylvania, the United States invaded Afghanistan to root out al-Qaeda cells and overthrow the Taliban regime. 2 years later, the United States invaded Iraq, which was suspected of harboring weapons of mass destruction. These two conflicts became part of the global war on terror and were largely defined by protracted counterinsurgency warfare. Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom would both result in the longest-running deployment and redeployment of National Guard troops since World War II. By 2011, some 300,000 Guardsmen had been federalized for service in Iraq or Afghanistan. Recall the significance of a Guardsman's status as they serve their country. Status is everything. In Title X status, the Guardsman is paid by the federal government and is under the control of the regular Army. The Guardsman answers to the President of the United States, who is the Commander-in-Chief. In Title 32 status, the National Guardsman is paid with federal funds, but is under the command and control of the state that they serve. Their governor becomes their Commander-in-Chief. Finally, there's a third status called State Active Duty, in which the Guardsman is funded purely by the state and is under state command and control. It is important to note that if a conflict of law arises between the National Guard of the several states and the National Guard of the United States, the Constitution and federal law is preeminent. Since 1933, when active duty service is complete, the members of the National Guard of the United States seamlessly return to their active status in the National Guard of the several states. This is the normal status of the National Guard. This is your National Guard at rest. While serving alongside their active duty counterparts in the global war on terror, the National Guard continues to be the primary response force to natural disasters. In 2005, one of the largest domestic mobilizations of the National Guard under state control was initiated in response to Hurricane Katrina. The National Guard continues to meet the demands of domestic emergencies, such as the devastating global pandemic of the coronavirus.
We need you to remain healthy and flexible to continue to be always ready, always there to support our community during this pandemic.
The importance of the National Guard moving forward into the 21st century has included significant legislative updates in keeping with both the Total Force Policy and its predecessor, the DIC Act of 1903. The National Defense Authorization Act of 2008 promoted the Chief of the National Guard Bureau to the rank of 4-star general. In this high-ranking capacity, the Chief has a statutory obligation to train the militia to federal standards. In 2012, the Empowerment Act elevated the Chief of the National Guard Bureau as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, reporting directly to the President of the United States. As a joint activity of the Department of Defense, the National Guard Bureau is a vital agency tasked with aligning the 54 distinct National Guards as a unified, formidable fighting force. The Chief of the National Guard Bureau serves as a Joint Chiefs of Staff member to provide military advice to the President, articulate the role of the non-federal National Guard to the President and other members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and to serve as a channel of communication between Department of Defense and the National Guards from 50 states, 3 territories, and the District of Columbia. As the United States progresses through the new century, National Guard units are adapting to complex challenges with modern training and hardware, including the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, drones, and space and cyber capabilities, to integrate multi-domain warfighting in keeping with the Total Force Policy. The future may bring additional roles for the National Guard, including a Space National Guard as an operational reserve of the new Space Force. As this development takes off, your National Guard stands ready. We, the people of the United States, are your National Guard.